The death of Lou Marsh, no New York City Youth Board worker had lost his life in line of duty, a remarkable record considering the hazardous nature of the work and the violent world in which it's carried out. The Youth Board worker must befriend his friendless, suspicious, frustrated youngsters and lead them toward responsible membership in a society which often would rather ignore them. The youth often are the products of broken homes or those from which love has been driven by indifference, drunkenness, brutality, or worse. They're thrust into the company of others like themselves. In the gangs that develop, they find their only recognition. Into such congregations of the hopeless, a youth board worker like Lou Marsh insinuates himself. Arthur Rogers is executive director of the New York City Youth Board.
We assigned Lou to the East Harlem area. In fact, it's called El Barrio. It's known as the district. And that is quite an area. The Youth Board has been in there practically since its foundation back in 1947. And East Harlem has been part of many changes. It's changed from the old Irish and Jewish inhabitants to the Italians and now to the Puerto Ricans and Negroes. And it is made up of housing projects that just seem to reach to the sky in grandeur and brick and steel and mortar. And you can just turn another corner and you'll find dilapidated tenements.
Last June, Lou Marsh began work in this turbulent area. The Youth Board trained him briefly. One of Lou's supervisors was Robert L. Cooper, Chief of Group Work and Recreation Services.
He cared deeply about people, and yet he was a man with great integrity. Lou was quiet, shy, and yet he hated violence, he hated intolerance, he hated prejudice, and he hated exploitation of any kind. Lou, I think, had a total commitment to spending his whole life trying to help the disadvantaged. Lou's last day was not very much different from any other day, except that he came to work at about 5:30 in the afternoon rather than 3 in the afternoon, because he actually worked the night before until 2:30 in the morning, trying to bring order out of a conflict situation between his group and the Playboys. So he came in later the last day. He came to the office, talked with his supervisor, did a little clerical administrative work, left the office, walked down 2nd Avenue, said hello to the people whom he passed on the street. I suspect some of the younger kids came up and said hello, Lou, and in his characteristic way, he probably patted them on the head. He nodded to the older people whom he knew as he walked through the block, and he got down to 112th Street. Lou made a left turn on 112th Street, walked to the middle of the block, the hangout of the Young Untouchables. He met the group, he talked with them. He told them that he would see them later because he had a dinner interview with a mother and one of the group members. He had his dinner appointment. He talked with the mother and one of his group members about getting the boy back in school. He left the family and went to the school. He met his group members in the school. 15 or 20 minutes after being in the school, somebody came into the gym and said the Playboys are coming down. The Young Untouchables ran out of the school. They saw the Playboys in the block. Lou said to his youngsters, let's move, let's cool it, let's blow, let's get lost. They listened and they followed him. And he took them over toward the Jefferson Park. It was then, we suspect, that he made a telephone call to his office reporting that there was an incident in his neighborhood. He then went back to the school, and it was in front of the school where he accosted the young adults and where the assault took place.
An ambulance took Lou to Metropolitan Hospital. He died of brain hemorrhages 2 days later, January 9th. The next day, youth board worker Raphael Ferrer took over Lou Marsh's work with the Young Untouchables.
I haven't felt any fear coming into this neighborhood. I feel that each of us has to make a decision as to those things that we're willing to work very hard for and sacrifice a great deal. The tragedy of this event motivated a great many youth that he worked with to return to school and to try to alter their way of life. And one youth in particular said he would like to return to the neighborhood after completing his education and engaging in the same type of work. The emotional reaction of these youth was somewhat profound, I would say, because we have to realize that these youngsters don't readily let themselves or lend themselves to emotional expression. It's very difficult for them to expose sincere emotions because of the pressure under which they live constantly. And so that when these youths, which they did, expressed a great deal of emotion. One youngster cried at the memorial service. Another didn't smile for a number of days. And I thought these were sincere expressions of sadness and of disbelief that such a thing did occur to such a person as Lou Marsh.
The Young Untouchables are 13 to 16 years old and find it difficult to talk to outsiders.
He asks us, what do we do today, you know? And we'll tell him, you know. And he says, oh, you shouldn't do this, that. I say, all right. Or you try to think of something to do, you know. You see it all together sitting on a bench. Say, come on, let's play some basketball or something like that, you know. He would always, you know, kind of keep us in a group, you know, take us places in groups. Like if he took us to one of us to a restaurant, he will take all of us. He'll make us member of the boys' clubs, you know, centers. So we can spend our time there at night. Once he took us, he tried to take us in a restaurant, you know, but we wasn't dressed properly, so we turned him down. Said no, take us in a smaller place, you know, pizzeria, and we eat pizza. He used to be with us just about all day. We come from the show, you know, about 1 o'clock. He would stick around and try to rush us upstairs. But, you know, he was worried about us a lot. He wasn't wasting his time. There should have been more men like him, you know, always trying to stop trouble, helping out everybody. If you needed money, he'll lend it to you. He was really all right. They should let the people know what happened to this man that was working with kids, trying to help him out. I used to hear people talking about Lou. They say, oh, this guy, he's breaking his back working with these kids. These kids, they'll never change. But Lou didn't feel that way.
Lou Marsh was the eldest of 3 closely grouped brothers. They lived in a poor Philadelphia neighborhood. All 3 were graduated from college, although the family's means are limited. The mother, Mrs. Minnie Marsh, is a cafeteria worker. The father, Ellis Marsh, is a cook.
So I asked him to come home to Philadelphia and work. And he said that the kind of work he wanted to do was only in New York. It didn't have that type of work in Philadelphia. And he liked New York very much. And he'd rather stay in New York and work.
Well, I felt good about it in a way, because that seemed to be his line of work. It seemed to be what he liked. And I counseled him about the danger of it. He said, well, just don't worry about it, Daddy. He says, that's what I like. I said, that's what I'm going to do. He says, they're taking Jesus Christ's life and hung him on the cross. He says, I'm not afraid.
Well, he spoke about several incidents that he had with some of the older boys that had been released, had served time and had been released, and was trying to start trouble with the younger boys. They resented his progress that he was making with the younger boys. He said they needed love, and their parents didn't cooperate with them. They didn't understand them. He visited the parents' home often and talked with the parents.
Chance played a role in Lou Marsh's life. He had hoped to become a doctor, but dropped that goal when he discovered he was an epileptic. A Baptist, he turned then to religion and social work. And that in turn brought Lou Marsh to the Young Untouchables and to a dark East Harlem street on a January night.
Our report continues in a minute after this message.
When Lou Marsh died, he left little in the way of worldly goods. There were some books, mostly borrowed, a few clothes, also borrowed or ill-fitting, and a collection of phonograph records. At most, they provide only a small clue to the kind of human being he was. And the kind of person he was concerned Lou Marsh deeply. The inner Lou Marsh was elusive, but there was a vibrancy and excitement about this somewhat disorganized young man who could be so carried away by a discussion that he would collapse because he had forgotten to take his pills. Even as a child, Lou Marsh was somehow different. His brother, Venice, 28, a Philadelphia schoolteacher.
Louis's relationship with me as children was both that of a playmate, because we were close to the same age, he being a year and a half older than I, but he also sensed the responsibility of being an older brother. This is a street where Louis played as a youngster. It's 3100 block of Krosky Street. We had the entire street to play in. There weren't many cars then in the street. There were only about 2 families that owned cars, and they usually parked them outside, so that we did have room to play. We played all the games of urban boyhood. This included handball, box ball, wire ball, half ball, tire ball. I remember one incident. We were playing in the street as boys, a group of us playing ball. There's a large Catholic school at the end of our block, and Lou broke one of the windows throwing the ball. Most of us scattered, hollered no chips in the windows. But Louis just walked into the church, walked upstairs, and informed the father there that he had broken a window. The father just patted him on the back and told him don't worry about it, and he didn't have to pay for it. Had he not told him, there might have been trouble, but since he did, there was none.
At Stanford University in California, Albert Marsh, 25, the youngest brother, is working toward a PhD in engineering mechanics.
The last time I saw him was last summer. I had gone home for about 2 or 3 week vacation, and my other brother and I drove up to New York one day. It was Saturday, I guess, and he had the day off. Lou and I spent the day walking through the area. We covered the area, I think, from about 100th Street up to 112th or so. Lou pointed out that there were about 5,000 people living there in this one block. And well, you could believe it, because just look in there, you could see about 400 or 500 people just out in the streets, and they were a pretty unhappy-looking bunch, I guess you might say.
From the turbulent streets of East Harlem, Lou Marsh had decided to return to Yale Divinity School and complete his studies for the ministry. Professor John Oliver Nelson, the Divinity School's director of fieldwork.
When he came here, one of the brave things that he elected to do was to go down and work at a very well manicured suburban church, a white church, down in Green's Farms in Westport, Connecticut. And here he identified with this rather crew-cut, overprivileged group of young people very well, and did a fine job. This was a brave thing for a Negro from the center of Philadelphia to do. His room was a real jungle, and his academic record was had some pretty jungle aspects to it too. But here the fellow was on his way, and you just felt that there was something new every time he came in. Chain smoking his way through an interview, and pacing the floor and shaking his fist at you pretty much, but he was living it out. And A lot of people didn't know what to make of him at all, but people rather respected and admired him. And anybody who had any tendency to be a beatnik or to be just a little off the trail, Lou was really usually his man. The last real letter, and he would write a real letter. This is 8 or 10 pages of letter that I got from him late in November. And this has some very interesting lines in it. Let me just read some of what it says here. Lou says, I've been wanting to write you for some time now, but the Untouchables have kept me busy as the dickens. I find that I'm discovering in a very trying situation that I really am a very selfish guy. At one time I discovered that I really didn't care about the kids I worked with, just the glory of the exciting and dangerous job of working with a teenage gang. More exciting than dangerous, really. I've had to temper myself as I came face to face with the fact that these kids are depending on me for so much. There's no one else for them to depend on. Wow, what a responsibility, he says. I have goofed a couple of times, but I hope and feel that I have at last come to a real struggle with selfish Lou Marsh. This really never happened to me before. And then there's another sentence or so back here toward the end of the letter. I plan to cut down on my working days now that my group has stopped fighting. 5 days a week from now on. There are some ways to help these kids. I can do this, but I cannot give them all of my life as I have tended to during the summer and fall. I must set limits on the amount of time I can spend with this group and also on the actual possibilities of my work with them. Now I will have more time for myself, for my own personal living, and this is becoming increasingly important to me. Now I will have more time in which to think, to feel, and to live, and to read. I'll be a better youth board worker also. Didn't have very much time to fulfill these pledges that he was making here.
Did Lou Marsh's death serve a purpose? In New York, Lou attended Judson Memorial Church. Reverend Howard Moody, senior minister.
I know that some people would say that the crummy street on which he died wasn't worth his life, that was so full of promise and hope. He was struggling, as many young people are these days, with his own identity, with his vocation, what he was going to do with his life. And in that struggle, he helped other people face up to the question, too. He was a person that bore on his own mind and spirit the marks of a minority person in society. He, unlike a lot of members of minority groups, did us in the majority in favor of exposing those scars to us. And I think that he had a tendency to make one a little uneasy that one had settled so easily for his place in life. But on the other hand, when a man stands for what he believes, and when he dies on the street and spills his blood in behalf of that belief, seems to me that crummy street has been made holy by that action. And that I can't then say that it's a senseless act or it's a senseless sacrifice. Because there aren't many times in this life when we're privileged to give ourselves completely for something we believe in. It took courage, and whereas I don't believe Lou would care to be made a martyr in any sense, still he stood there and died for what he believed.
I don't know if Lou's death was worth it or not. I read very flowery articles and they all end up on the theme that he didn't, die in vain, I guess you might say. And I myself said this a few weeks ago, but I don't really know that it'll have any lasting effect. Sure, there's now a Lewis Marsh Center in East Harlem somewhere, and there's a scholarship fund, but how much can a scholarship fund do? That can support maybe one or two fellows a year from this area, and That's one out of thousands.
My strong conviction is that Lou's death does have purpose. That he didn't die in vain. That the neighborhood, the school, the block where he lived, where he worked, where he died, in the words of a minister, this is hallowed ground. I think it will be many, many years before Lou Marsh, if ever, is forgotten. His memory will serve as a landmark and as a constant reminder that there is goodness in the world, that there are people who care, that there are people who want to help, will help, and do help.
I wish the people who read the newspapers would maybe just write a few letters to important people, someone who is in a position to sponsor some sort of legislation that'll do away with the big problem. If this can be done, I can say his death wasn't in vain, but if it isn't done, I don't think his death was worth it at all.
It is not surprising that Lou Marsh's family should be less certain than others that his death had meaning. It's not for us to judge. During our allotted time, all of us touch on many lives. Sometimes we're aware of the influence we exert, but on other occasions, perhaps by no more than a word, we help shape the lives of others we hardly know and soon forget in ways we could never imagine. In the Bible it's written, "Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." Well, this Lou Marsh did. And the sacrifice of this gangling, questioning young man from North Philadelphia can be evaluated only in the fullness of time, and only